Good evening, friends, and welcome to the fourth position, where we have a very big task ahead of us to develop a new way of thinking, a new political theory, a fourth position. It was not that long ago that the idea that there could be any other ideas seemed insane. If we go back to 1992, we get to read a fantastic book by Francis Fukuyama, who basically, indulging in the triumphant moment of the end of communism, declared that we now are living in the end of history, that after communism had been defeated, that slowly the last few communist sort of regimes would be knocked off the planet, any other sort of remnants of kings of yesteryear and old would all fade away, and we'd all essentially have witnessed, you, me, and everyone watching now, we've basically lived through the ideological apocalypse, the end of any new possible political ideas. But guess what? He was completely wrong. Obviously, the struggle for ideology continues to this day. Things that are totally new and were unspoken of 20, 10, maybe even somewhat 5 years ago, like the social justice warriors and the alt-right, have really come center stage and are changing the way a lot of young people think. However, their views are more or less grounded in repeating the 20th century. We here at the fourth position want to do something else. It's concepts like Viktor Orban's illiberal democracy that he's mentioned many times, or the thoughts that come from Russia regarding the construction of a fourth political theory. That's what we're here to discuss. Something that not just repeats, rehashes, repackages, remarkets the ideas of the 20th century, but combines them together, grabs something from our ancient past, and creates something totally new. But before we can begin to formulate a new idea, we have to take a look at what was. What happened in the violent, turbulent, ideological battlefield of the 20th century? Well, essentially there were three big political theories. Communism, liberalism, often referred to as Western-style democracy, and nationalism/fascism. And these three ideas, these three ideologies, the core of them, at each one of them is a subject. The subject of liberalism that we can see today is the individual. We have individual rights. Everything is about your individual agreement with the government. Everything is about you, and again, you. Which these ideas may seem very commonplace to think this way right now. Back 200 or 300 years ago, when humans lived a much more collective sort of way of living, the idea of basing everything around the individual was a lot more radical than it would seem today. We're just used to it. Now, communism's subject was not the individual, it was the working class. It was the workers of the world unite. That idea, that there's this oppressed lower class, and that it's their job to build a system where they are in power, to take the power from the capitalists, the bourgeoisie, and we can see sort of in the modern social justice interpretation of it, it would seem to be some sort of repressed minority groups need to be that class that jumps up. But regardless, all the different flavors of communism that we were able to see in the 20th century, moving into the 21st, all revolve around this central class. Now, fascism, nationalism, this is probably the easiest one to understand. Their subject is a particular ethnic group, possibly race or other. That is the core. For the Germans to be a person in their system, it was to be German during fascism. For the Italians to be Italian, maybe European in a sense, and so on. It's the idea of putting a certain group at the core of society, which is very antithetical to the liberalism we have today. Now, one thing that's also very important is to look at how these different groups view each other, right? If we are here at this fourth position to offer any sort of new ideas, anyone who's a liberal in the either classical liberal sense or someone who's just an individualist, they're going to accuse us of being some sort of commie-Nazis, because to them, communism and fascism are essentially the same. They're both socialism. The subject of communism is a group, it's a class. The subject of nationalism is a group, it's some sort of nation or ethnic group. And for them, that's blasphemy. But the thing they don't realize is that from the other two perspectives, it basically looks the same way. Communists sort of views liberalism and fascism as being very similar. There's still a hierarchy. There's still the rich and the poor. There's still the exploited bottom of working class people who will never catch a break in either system. So what difference does it really make? They're both unfair. They're both not international. They're not both revolved around defending workers' rights. So for them, who cares? Communism is completely international. That's how they see things. Of course, from the fascist perspective, neither communism nor liberalism cares about ethnicity, doesn't care about their ethnic group. If they look at communists, they look at liberals. Liberals essentially just say any individual who comes to the country and has citizenship, they're all the same. And in the 21st century, now essentially all individuals are the same regardless of who they are. And more or less, the communists only really cared if you were part of the working class. If you were part of the working class, part of the communist revolution, you were good regardless of ethnicity. So essentially, when we put these 3 points into these 3 subjects into a triangle, they're all sort of mutually repulsive to each other, but they're also each a little bit ignorant and a little bit flawed. We can prove that we exist. Let's go from the liberalist sort of perspective to start. I exist, you exist, we have eyes that we see out of our head with, we have our own lifespan, we have our own individual desires, our own greed, and so on. This is provable, this is beyond a doubt. But if we were to try to just go up to British people or Chinese people and just tell them, guys, you're individuals. There's no ethnicity, there's no social class, you're just individuals. Well, that's just as insane. Just because there's really no scientific way to prove that British people or Chinese people exist, they do. And it's obvious to all of us. But the problem with all 3 of these theories is that they're extremist in this sense. Liberalism only acknowledges the individual. But guess what? Every one of us is part of a culture. We are part of a working class. Maybe we don't necessarily agree with other members of that working class, but we are. Just as in the opposite, whereas with communism and with fascism, they're so obsessed with this group that they totally ignored the fact that there could be an individual who maybe isn't quite like their own culture, or there could be people who might not need to be in the working class in order to have some benefit to society. We have to pick our own subject here. If we're going to create our own political theory, we have to have a subject. But the hard question is, so is it I or is it we? I would argue that the mistake of the 20th century in this sort of debate between I and we as the subject of political theory is forcing the choice. Why can't it be both? Because in reality it is both. We are individuals, but we do exist in a culture. We are individuals, but we do exist in class-based structures everywhere we go. Even in communist societies, there were still class-based structures. Why not have both? Why not have I and we involved in the subject for a political theory? That leads us closer to determining what that subject would be, but we're still very far away from it. In the next video, we'll start to get into this building of a new subject in order to build a new political theory. I hope you found this video interesting. If you want to go more in depth with what I had to say, take a look at the article that I wrote about this very topic on the Center for Syncretic Studies in the description of this video below. Just click on the link and you'll be able to read the entire article. We're building ideas together. This was and is, and will be, the 4th position.